What is the science of reading? What are leaders doing to accelerate reading achievement? We answer these questions and more in Science of Reading Leadership, Guiding Minds, Transforming Lives, powered by Just Right Reader.
Hello, and welcome to the podcast today. We are thrilled to have our guest, Jeff McCoy, with us. Jeff McCoy is the Associate Superintendent for Academics at Greenville County Schools. Throughout his career, he has been an International Baccalaureate Coordinator, an Instructional Technology Specialist, Distance Learning Coordinator, Director of Instructional Technology, and Director of Academic Innovation and Technology. So lots of different experiences and wisdom that you're bringing here today. Jeff, welcome. We're excited to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
So many things that you have done, it's impressive. So how did you get into education?
So I would say probably like many people, actually, my journey actually started back when I was actually a childhood. I'd always wanted to be a teacher, did the whole, playing with your stuffed animals, teaching, school, doing all that even from an early age. And then I taught several years in the classroom and was always incorporating technology in my classroom. And so the director of instructional technology at the time kept asking me, why don't you come to the district office and help train teachers on how to use technology and all of that. And so finally, when the time was right, I finally accepted that offer to go to the district office as a facilitator. And I love my time working on the technology side and really helping teachers integrate, but really miss the stronger curriculum connection side. So, 10, 12 years ago, asked about my superintendent about moving, if there was a position available, moving over to the academic side. And so actually got a great opportunity for 2 years where I actually bridged the gap between technology and academics, which was a kind of an innovative position. That was my innovative academic innovation technology position. We've retained that. We still have that position here. It's an incredibly valuable position, just being able to talk the talk of both sides of the house to bring them together. So, and then took this job about, 8 years ago as associate superintendent, fully on the academic side. So,
all right. Yeah, that academic and the instructional technology piece and that you talk about bridging is so incredibly important as we continue to see more and more technology. And then also now we kind of have more of a push for those, hard copy, going back to some of the basics too. So tell us a little bit more about Greenville County Schools in South Carolina.
So Greenville is the largest county in South Carolina. We're about 79,000 students. We're a very fortunate that we're a high growth district still. We still grow 1,000, 1,500 kids a year in Greenville. So it's Greenville, it's a kind of explosive town right now as far as growth goes. So we're surprisingly to a lot of people though who've been to Greenville, we are actually sitting around that 58 to 60% poverty for our students. A lot of wealth in Greenville, but the students who attend our schools actually are about 58 to 60% poverty. We have a large ML population as well, 15 to 20% MLs, second language students as well. A lot of language spoken in Greenville. So despite a lot of people's perception when they come, Greenville is actually a very diverse city. Has challenges, but also has a lot of pros and a lot of positives that are going on for us, both in test score growth, and I think the diversity of our community.
That's fascinating to hear the differences in your population. I think that there is a large misconception when you hear Greenville. I appreciate you highlighting that and bringing that to light. So I want to know a little bit more about the evolution that Greenville went through as it relates to literacy and the work that you all were doing with that.
Yeah, so when I was in instructional technology back in the day, I would say that was about 3 associate superintendents ago. They moved from 4 blocks. Some people will remember 4 blocks. To the balanced literacy model. So that was probably 15 years ago or so, maybe 20. And so, I remember being here for that challenge of 4 blocks was a very structured, kind of model for our teachers. And I remember moving from that and kind of the difficulty teachers have because balanced literacy is a lot more kind of open and not quite as structured. So, moving from that model to a very structured structured to a non-structured model it was a challenge. It was difficult, for our teachers. When I took over in associate superintendent 8 years ago, when I did kind of my little listening tour of schools and teachers and even my academics department themselves, one of the things they said was the difficulty. They didn't feel like they had the resources to implement the balanced literacy at the time. They felt like they were still a little lost in the balanced literacy as far as what they needed to do and the structure and all of that. And so, I've always kind of been very honest with my team. When I came in, I wouldn't have necessarily chosen the model that we had that was in existence. But as people know, in large districts and when you've invested a lot of resources and, it wasn't that our kids weren't learning, they were, we were having success. We were having increased test scores year over year. But we did take a very hard look at what about those kids that weren't succeeding? Why were certain populations or certain groups of children not succeeding in literacy at the same rate? So really took a look at that. And even back then, 8 years ago, what we did was we really recognized in the balanced literacy model that there was a phonics deficit, that we really felt like that was something that was missing. And so, we underwent LETRS training at that time for a cohort of teachers, and trainers to be done. Other schools implemented, we gave them some choice, some other phonics programs they could implement as well. So even from that back early time, 8 years ago, I wouldn't have said, and I still don't ever say, even though we've changed more over to science of reading, I've never said we were a pure balanced literacy district, because we kind of looked at the good things and then looked at kind of the weaknesses and said, we're going to fill these gaps with other things that we know work with children.
Jeff, when do you feel like it sounds like you've kind of always recognized the value of assessing where you are, assessing where there might be holes. When did you kind of recognize either the value of the science of reading or, even just knowing about that body of research?
So my journey on that really was before I became associate superintendent. When I was in the position of executive director of academic innovation and technology. I worked under, a brilliant associate superintendent then, Dr. Dee Washington, who's still one of my very good friends today. And I think even she recognized, or knows she did. We had a lot of conversations about, again, she may not have chosen that same program had she been the one to choose it, but she wasn't. It was something we inherited. So we made the best of it, that was there and tried to fill in those gaps. I really started because of my background. I was elementary certified, but I have only taught middle school. So, we don't do a lot of, reading.
Right.
Middle school grades. So I really had to kind of pour myself in as the executive director, kind of learning, okay, what model would I choose? And that was not just focusing on science of reading. That was kind of looking at the body of research out there. And I felt even then, looking at it, we try to keep this as a philosophy even now, that we don't tag science of reading as a program as much as we tag that as a body of research, of best practices. So that was kind of when I really kind of started my journey of really learning in depth, really more how children read and kind of the science and research behind the best practice of how kids learn to read.
That's fascinating. And it's really exciting because when you really start to look at all the research that is out there and you really start to find what's going to be beautiful and the best fit for your demographic and your students, and really seeing all of that come together is like a magical thing that happens, right? What would you say that your goals are around literacy now in Greenville?
So 2 or 3 years ago, when kind of I don't want to say the light reading wars started again, but when the whole reading wars started again, we kind of made the decision we weren't going to tag it as anything. We were going to call it the Greenville County Schools Literacy Framework. So that from this point on, it really is about the body of research on how children read. And, again, there's some parts of balanced literacy that work well for our kids. And so, pulling the best practices that work for that with some kids, but then, that science of reading, because there's a little overlap there on certain things. And so, pulling over some of the science of reading to build our literacy framework. It is going to be heavier now, science of reading, than it is anything else, but really trying to keep that, so we're not doing that pendulum swing constantly on teachers. So that no matter what changes come in the future or what new research may emerge to say, hey, this actually works really well with kids. It's not a new thing. It's not something new program. It's just part of the body of research as part of the Greenville County Schools literacy framework that we do. So that for us was kind of when we started shifting a little bit and just saying, let's pull the Band-Aid off now, if you will. Let's kind of start making this harder shift, but let's not tag it as a program so that 10 years down the road, we're doing this whole big shift again.
This episode is brought to you by Just Right Reader. Extend phonics instruction, strengthen school-home partnerships, and accelerate reading achievement with take-home decodable packs from Just Right Reader. Personalized take-home packs make phonics fun and accessible for families. Every book comes with a video phonics lesson and writing pages to help readers reinforce their decoding and writing skills. To learn more, visit justrightreader.com. What you're saying is really how good education happens, right? Not ripping away all of the things because this is the trend now, or not ripping away something because this is taboo, but really trying to say, okay, I hear all that's happening. There's a lot of best practices, what's working and what can be adjusted. And when you do that intentional work, you come up with a framework for our students that works and we see results. And I guess my question from that would be, you talked about teachers and the challenge of, bringing them on board and letting them see like, this is okay, we can do this. But then on the other side, how have you seen success coming from that? Like, what is the successes that you can point to, like, this is working for us?
So the biggest success, and funny you asked that question because we're getting ready to go to our board for some additional stipends for teachers, all teachers K through 3 to go through LETRS training because the state is mandating that. So the state is mandating from K to 3 LETRS training. We had 9 schools actually start it 2 years ago. And so we've gone back to those schools and say, give us some feedback, give us some quotes we can use about, how this is impacted, if it's impacted your work. And one of the things the teachers have said, the ones that we've gotten quotes from has said, it really gave me a sense of now, again, that whole how kids learn to read, but really gave me the skills that I needed to actually diagnose why kids aren't reading. And I think that was the big missing part in the past, that it wasn't about, a lot of times teachers would tell you, oh, Terri can't read. But then when you say, well, what do we need to work on with her? What skills do we need to give? What needs to happen in intervention? They a lot of times could not pinpoint that it was a specific reading issue, or in some cases a disability. Or it wasn't one single point of, well, they are not decoding correctly, and that's why that's leading to this. So those teachers have kind of recognized now, completing that training, that this is like what I should have had in college. And this is really what I should have been prepared to go into my classrooms with and do. Our principal, actually, 2 principals that commented on it, both of them said, one's a 30-year veteran in education. She said, that LETRS training, that training I've gone through with this has been the best training in 30 years as an educator I've ever received. And I feel so much more equipped to actually diagnose and, for teachers, ask the right questions to a teacher to help diagnose a reading problem.
Jeff, did you have all of your administrators go through LETRS?
So they will be. The 9 schools that had to go through it because of where their performance was, all of those administrators, actually that entire school went through it. So all teachers, all administrators, instructional coaches, everybody. For the new state requirement coming down that will start in the fall, all teachers, all administrators, instructional coaches will also go through that training as well.
As someone who leads, instruction, right, for an entire district, I think some of the benefits would be obvious of having administrators go through LETRS and that type of training with their staff. But what specifically have you seen?
Well, I think, initially you have to know as much as the teachers know in that regard to give instructional feedback that results in improvement. So not a shorter course in this area, not a, like we do sometimes. This actually had to be the actual course, so they understood the same case, because most of us that were even trained in elementary, I would argue probably none of us would say we were adequately prepared in college to teach reading to students. So for us, what we've seen out of that leadership, kind of what one of our principals said, is that she has a whole new take when she walks into the classroom and she's watching reading instruction. She has a whole new take now and knows the questions to ask, to say, Christy, why are you, so explain to me why you're doing that, or why you said this, or whatever happens to be. she just knows the questions now that she asks and can ask. And it's also important her to understand and know the difference between having, now that we're shifting away, also being able to shift and understand the difference between the balanced literacy strategies and the science of reading research strategies and what we should be using. So she needs to have an in-depth knowledge to do that.
Everybody, it sounds like you're saying everybody is now on the same page. And so that the conversation is beneficial to everyone because everyone's speaking the same language.
Yes, and I think even from the top down, one of the, my team, my directors of elementary, my specialists have taken or are involved now in the LETRS training. I'll be doing it this fall as well, starting in the summertime to do the LETRS training. I've not had it myself as well. So I think from all of us from the top down, being able to speak that language and the importance of what we do in the classroom to help teach students how to read, really by third grade, but whenever that happens, but certainly as our goal is by third grade.
So then what would your advice be, or how can we get other leaders to buy into the science of reading?
Well, I think it's I think anybody who looks at the body of research, I've had the, privilege of spending some time with some of the authors of the research and that kind of thing and some events that we've done. And I think when you look at that body of research and put aside your own assumptions of, everybody has an opinion because everybody learned to read somehow. Everybody was trained somehow. And so, but I think if you set that aside truly about how I learn, because every child does learn differently, but set that aside and really dive into the research on what the research actually says, I think most people would come to the conclusion that this body of work and the research really is strong and really, not to say it's going to work for every child, but that's why we have other strategies that we can use and pull in that might work. But I think that whole collection body of research, there's something in there I believe, to help every child learn to read.
Absolutely. And yeah, I like how you said that too. It's really a lot of cognitive dissonance happening, I think, because we have invested, schools all over the country have invested billions of dollars, right, in training teachers to teach reading in a certain way. And then to kind of be like, hey, we're actually looking at some research and we're looking at some science, and that wasn't the best way. That would be really hard to unlearn and undo.
And it is. And I think, although I've been pleasantly surprised, the teachers even that have not gone through the training, when we rolled this out and said, a lot of our teachers had already met the current state requirement for Read to Succeed, which was some courses. Now they have to go back and say, I hate, you have to go through this new training and letters. But most of the teachers actually, even though they haven't had the training, have been like, this is great. This is what I need to be. I think this is going to be so much more valuable for me. So those 9 schools, there's been, a lot of communication, I think, back and forth. And so I think those teachers realize, and they kind of expressed that, hey, this is really good training. It's really helped me in my classroom. That really has helped kind of spread it across the district to now where teachers are kind of like, okay, yeah, it's 2 more years of coursework, but if it's going to help my kids and is that valuable, this is what I need to do and it's best for kids.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that you see the results so quickly once you start teaching in that way. So, Jeff, we'd love to know a little bit more about what the role of the family is in supporting the literacy journey in your school district.
We actually started trying to engage the parents even in the summer, particularly for those parents that had to send their kids to summer school, but even the ones that didn't, that were close and maybe couldn't attend summer school for some reason. We started a website that really gave the parents some options. Hey, here's what you can do to teach your children or reinforce at least some of the skills that kids are learning in their classes in literacy and reading. To try to boil that down to very simple things, knowing that parents are not educators, but most parents, if you say, hey, if you can just read and ask these questions to kids, looking for that comprehension piece, or when a kid gets stuck, using these strategies to help the child figure out the word, that was something we started trying to do very simply in the summertime. That has carried over into the school year as well. And we try to really encourage our schools to partner with families. Most families will do what you tell them to do or ask them to do if they know what to do. But most parents don't know how to teach reading. So give them the simple strategies, give them the simple, basically, even basic, if you just read to your kid every night. But, for those parents who are willing and able to take it to that next level, hey, here's some strategies you can use to actually when your kid gets stuck. But we do in our Title I schools, particularly, we have parent involvement coordinators. So we have parent nights and things where teachers can come in and work with the parents on here's how you can teach your kid to read or to become a better reader. So I think it's transparency. I think it's communication. I think parents deserve to write to know where their child is when it comes to reading. Even if they're in first grade and they're a little bit behind, parents deserve to know that. And most parents will be willing, if you say, hey, if you could just work with your child on this and do this, that's really going to help them become a better reader, and we can get them back on grade level.
And I honestly think that the science of reading and, like you said, LETRS training and all of that allows teachers to have the know-how, the answer to the question of, how do I help my child, right? I think before we were all just kind of trying to figure out what that looks like to help your child. So that question was a challenging question. It was a tricky question. And now we have solid, hands-on, this is how you can help. And I think that that's empowering to all of us, teachers, administrators, parents, and students. And I think that that's really exciting.
Jeff, I have to ask, districts all across the country are doing similar things. They're having teachers go through LETRS. They're adopting new materials. What do you think the difference is? Because not everybody's seeing those same results. So obviously you've got hardworking teachers. Do you think that there's obviously it's a combination of things, but if you had to pinpoint what you think might be different about what Greenville's doing?
So I think it goes back to our multi-tiered system of support philosophy. When we put that in place 6 or 7 years ago, we kind of emphasize and have since then that tier 2 and tier 3 instruction is also the job of the tier 1 teacher. So you have to own all 3 tiers. What we did during the pandemic, though, teachers know that they have to own the 3 tiers. But during the pandemic, we actually doubled and tripled our interventionists with our ESSER money because we knew that strategy worked. We knew we were getting gains from interventionists that we put in place. And so gradually over the last few years, we've been reducing those interventionists now because we don't have as many kids that are in need of that. But that tier 2, tier 3 starts with a core 1 teacher. And then certainly in addition to, many times we are sending a student out, not during core instruction, but we are sending a kid out to get that intervention in that intensive intervention to be able to catch them up maybe from where they are to where they need to be. So I think part of that was just a strategy in how we use our ESSER funds to really use them towards something we knew already worked, and we just doubled down on that strategy.
Yeah. Well, and so smart too, it sounds like you had the foresight too to know, hey, ESSER funds aren't going to be here forever. And so having kind of a, I don't know if the right word, but an escape plan essentially.
Or a strategic plan.
Yeah, decreasing the need for those interventionists. So that was really smart.
Yeah. And then I also heard you say during the conversation that you didn't just throw the whole baby out with the bathwater. You really did think about what was working and kept that. And I think that that's another strategy that worked in your favor because there was something working. And in continuing to do the things that were working and then adding other things that are working just doubled the goodness. All right. So we always go in and we always end our podcast with a question that kind of brings all of this together. So the question is, what 2 leadership actions can district leaders take to support in their literacy development?
So I would say, and this probably applies to anything, not just the literacy development piece, but I think always be patient. And we're masters of that in a large district because as much as I like things to happen immediately, it's like, if people say it's like turning a cruise ship. I mean, it takes time and it doesn't happen as immediate as you want it to happen. So that patience and being able to patient and reserve that space for the frustrations that come naturally, not because teachers don't want to do what's best for kids, but because they oftentimes are put through the pendulum swings and you got to do this now and then you got to do this, you got to do this. So I think the patience of actually showing them, here's why this is best for your kids, and here's the results we've had by doing this in other places. And most teachers are going to get on board with that. And then the other thing, I think, just be flexible and reserve that space. As leaders, I think we have to, when teachers need that vent time, they need that frustration point, or we need to give a little flexibility because not all teachers learn at the same rate as our students learn. They're very similar to our students. And so giving that flexibility of, you need a little bit more time, Terri. We'll need a little bit more coaching or some support that we can provide you to help you be more successful in this, I think would be the 2 things. Again, that kind of apply to everything, not just literacy, but it certainly applies to our journey of kind of shifting away from one pedagogy or philosophy to another.
Awesome.
Patience and flexibility. I like it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for being here. Do you have any sort of online professional learning network where people can find you in terms of maybe a Twitter or LinkedIn?
So I'm both. I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn. The same Addy there. It's J McCoy GCS is both my Twitter and my LinkedIn account.
All right. Well, go ahead. You can find Jeff McCoy online if you'd like to keep the conversation going. Thank you so much for being here. We have truly loved learning from your experiences and your wisdom. And just thanks for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. If you found this conversation valuable, please subscribe and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. We will see you next time on Science of Reading Leadership, guiding minds, transforming lives.